here centering students, but also we are here as students to learn and engage with Professor Shirley and Tate. And I'll give a brief introduction to her. She's a Black decolonial feminist who works at the intersections of race and gender on Black life in the diaspora. She's professor and Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Feminism and Intersectionality in the Sociology Department of the University of Alberta, and honorary professor Nelson Mandela University, South Africa, affiliated to Christchurch. She has written extensively on institutional racism, affect, the Black body in freedom and enslavement, mixed race, race performativity, beauty, hybridity, coloniality, decolonization, anti-racism, and Black Caribbean decolonial thought. We are here today to hear her reflect on her writing, her book, Decolonizing Sambo, with the title of her talk, Doing Ethnography When You Are Not an Ethnographer, Doing Archival Work When You Are Not a Historian. It is truly a great honor to share this space with you, with everyone, and with that, I'll hand over to Shirley.
Thank you so much, Satvi. Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Jovi, for your translation as we go through as well. I have to say I'm a little bit, I'd put anxious, but I think a little bit nervous. I'd downgrade from anxiety to nervous because this is quite new for me to actually talk about the process of a book that I've already written and to think about the analyses and theories that animate that book and that keep animating me in my thinking about this particular concept or this thing called sambo. But I'll try to do my best, really. And if there are any shortcomings, please forgive me. I'll try and deal with them in the question and answer session. Okay, so I'm going to start off by the question, what is sambo? Because I think it's an important spot to start in case, you know, things go bad later, at least you've got that little bit from the talk in your heads. So what is sambo, the first part? Then I'm going to look at my own analytical and theoretical orientations in this thing that I call decolonizing sambo, as process, as analysis, as thought, as writing. If I have time, I'm going to look at humor as just one of the appearances of sambo in the archive. But if I don't, I'll leave that out. And then I'm going to go to a conclusion. I do have some PowerPoints and they do have images on them. And I want to apologize now for some of the offensive images you will see, but that is unavoidable if you look at this kind of historically as well. So the subtext to my talk, Satvi said what the title was, and the subtext is, this is the story about a boy, or was he? Or is it just that same old white supremacy? So that's what I wanted to think about as I go through. So to the introduction. My book, Decolonizing Sambo, Transculturation, Fungibility, and Black and People of Color Futurity, began by chance in a brief tour of the sites in Cape Town, South Africa. This book is now in its second edition, but the basic premise of it hasn't changed much. So that's what I'm going to share with you. There I was in Cape Town, South Africa, somebody from the Western Hemisphere, from Jamaica, but also from the UK, somebody who knew a bit about racial structuration in Latin America and also in the United States. There I was at the site of the slave market in Church Square, and I had a bit of an incredible moment when I saw the word sambo written on the granite pillars, which are in Church Square, commemorating the enslaved people who came from different parts of the world to South Africa to work on the plantations. I saw Sambo von Tembojit. I had to do a search to find out where Tembojit was because I had never heard of Tembojit before. Turns out to be Indonesian. I hope that's right. That's what I put in the book anyway. And I also saw Sambo von Temebad. And that turned out to be India. You can check it online yourself. You'll see it if you just look at Church Square and just scroll around the granite pillars. These granite pillars serve to remind visitors that these were people, because Church Square is now a tourist site, even though it's also the location of the old slave market. And I trace these names also to the Groot Constantia plantation, also in Cape Town. So what a revelation, Sambo. But what was this name of subjection doing in Cape Town was my immediate thought. My mind went in all directions because I did not expect that word on the African continent in the context of enslavement at all. And this began my ethnography of what I began to realize was a transcultural archive of white European settler colonialism. And my task, I thought to myself at the time, was to decolonize Sambo by seeing it as an artifact of the white European settler Sambo psyche. That became very obvious to me as I began to look through the archive of the research that I was developing. So I was going to show Sambo as a transcultural name for subjection and white domination within settler colonialism and enslavement death worlds. In this Sambo archive, all colonized and enslaved people, whether in the Caribbean, Canada, Australia, the US, Europe, the African continent, Latin America, Central America, India, Indonesia, are fungible, using Saidiya Hartman's term. Fungibility means the interchangeability of bodies, and that is the condition of racialized, colonized, enslaved people subjected to lives of inferiorization, dispossession, and social death that span European empires. So what of ethnography, you might wonder? I'm still working on this myself, remember, right? Because as I said, I'm doing ethnography when I'm not an ethnographer. And I know people who see themselves as real ethnographers would critique my work. That's also okay. My ethnography here is not about being immersed within and writing about the culture of a hitherto unknown people, as they do in cultural anthropology. I am part of the culture myself, immersed in it, though positioned as Black woman other, as I go about my work on Black diaspora studies and thinking about the outlines of Black decolonial feminism. Ethnography for me is a writing of and about anti-Black culture in white supremacist European colonial ethnocracy, or what Barna Hess calls raceocracy. It could be considered to be akin to Saidiya Hartman's critical fabulations in Venus in Two Acts. I'm Jamaican, I can't say that word, okay? But not white. In that article, Hartman combined archival work with critical theory and fictional narrative in order to put right history's omissions. There is critical theory in my work, of course, but I'm not trying to write history's omissions, but analyze colonialism's creations. There is no fictional narrative in my work, apart from the fact that Sambo is itself a white supremacist colonial fiction. The fiction of Sambo is one created by European colonialisms, and I'm using that in the plural. So the fiction of Sambo is one created by European colonialism's fabulation to explain and build the world where Sambo exists, that it wanted, or they wanted, to rule and dominate. This worlding of the world remains present in the archive. Sambo remains, although 21st century post-racial sensibilities relegates it to being too offensive for public consumption. Even though the attempt has been made at white occultation, we still see Sambo everywhere in public life because of what I call in the book, the Samboification of society, which has been with us for centuries. For example, in the UK that I know quite well because I've lived there for so long, there's an incredible love for the Gollywog. And the Little Black Sambo book is still in circulation. You can buy it on Amazon. I downloaded it. It's even digitized when I was going to do this work because I'd never read it before. My approach to the Sambo ethnography is also something like Anne Laura Stoller's work in Along the Archival Brain. If you haven't read that book, please read it. I certainly drew inspiration from her work, as she showed that the colonial archive built worlds out there and in here in the psyche out there in the colonies and in the metropole. My sambo archive, with its varieties of artifacts, is the white European sambo psyche construction and the primary material drawn on. The sambo ethnography was always done with uneasiness and friction, as I read and theorized as a Jamaican descendant of African enslaved and indentured peoples. I was, of course, nowhere to be found. I never searched for myself. However, I could be seen, nonetheless, within the sambo frame by what African-American philosopher George Yancey calls whiteliness. Thus, doing ethnography when I'm not an anthropologist and doing archival work when I'm not a historian is more an unsteady, fraught suturing of sorts, a suturing of sambo's emergence in, through the white European settler colonial psyche made present in archives spanning centuries of Caribbean plantation records, slave shipment manifests, songs, books, jokes, newspaper articles, racial categorizations, plays, toys, films, graves, tourist sites, statues, sweets, and other artifacts of colonial and contemporary white supremacy in North America, Australia, Europe, pre-partition India, Latin America, and the Caribbean. My focus in this ethnography from enslavement to the 21st century is on the practice of naming as, of, for subjection, and its place in the shared white European settler colonial sambo psyche along the transcultural roots of colonialism, indigenous dispossession, attempted genocide, enslavement, indenture, and death, beginning from the Caribbean and going outwards to other European colonial locations where sambo emerges in the archives of empire. I want to begin with what sambo is constructed as being, then look at my analytical and theoretical foundations before maybe using examples from one part of the archive, as I said before, humor. And I do this to show sambo's colonial fabulation in newspapers, comic strips, and animation. So what is sambo? Let me try and do my PowerPoint here. Share. I think it's still there. Ah, yes, share. Yes, there we are. So I've just put that one up. Is it on the right one? That's the right one. Okay. I'm going to, in this part, I'm going to give you some examples of how sambo emerges in different parts of the archive. So what is sambo? Writing from within our Western hemispheric ethnocracy, raceocracy, we know sambo from the US and Canada as a bumbling fool, minstrel, inept, stupid, childlike, coon, always late, work shy, African descendant, child or adult. There are also places like Sambo Reef in Florida, which I never got to go to because I didn't have a car, and Sambo's Grave in the UK, which I have been to. Sambo in South Africa was a revelation to me, as I said before, because it opened up the world of Sambo to other regions, other zones of colonization and forced movement of people into bondage. Caribbean, Latin America, the African continent, Indonesia, India, North America, Europe, Australia, Asia, bound together by one word, sambo, and four defining events, I think. European colonialism, attempted indigenous genocide and dispossession, enslavement, and indenture. My search through this white European archive of death, terror, trauma, focused on that one key word, sambo. I began with Jamaican English historians and planters, Edward Long, who wrote the History of Jamaica in 1774, and Brian Edwards, who wrote the History, Civil and Commercial of the British Colonies in the West Indies, published in 1793. I also read some of the diary of the English serial rapist of African enslaved women, overseer and slave owner in Jamaica, Thomas Thistlewood. I looked at Agostino Brunias's 18th century paintings of so-called West Indian Black women. For example, West Indian washerwomen, one of his very famous paintings. He also portrayed Indigenous and Black interaction. For example, West Indian man of color directing two Carib women with a baby, and the Caribs and Black Caribs of St. Vincent. It was the planters Long and Edwards who highlighted the Spanish language sambo, spelled with a Z, connection to English sambo, spelled with an S, among other racialized naming for a mixed race person based on blood quantum developed during Spanish and English colonialism, indigenous dispossession, and enslavement. In Long and Edwards, sambo is the child of a mulatto. Don't use these words, okay, they're horrible. And a non-mixed race Black person. In the UK archive, sambo was the name of several soldiers in the British colonial armies. So it could also be an African continental name. For example, samba in Wolof means comfort. So let's just give you some examples then. Because I've got like lots of slides here. So sambo is the child of a mulatto and a non-mixed race person. We see that, for example, in a return of slaves in the parish of St. Anne in Jamaica from 1817. You see the color name very clearly there and the origin of the enslaved person. So sambo with the big S, maybe that was the name of the person from the African continent, I don't know, but it appeared as a big S in the records. Color, Negro, age 40, origin Africa. Then you'll see under origin for the females below, that's exactly how it was written in this extract from the archive. You see Creole, 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 Creole. And then you see color, sambo, 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 sambo. So sambo became a color name at some point, right? Anyway, I'm not sure when it was, maybe it's 1700s or something. But Creole means they were born in Jamaica, right? So that's one sambo. And here we have from Edward Long, talking about sambo being from Spanish colonies. So child of a mulatta, that is like a mixed race woman. You know, Spanish always has the gender terms at the end represented by O or A. And a Negro is a sambo de mulata. The child of an Indian and a Negro is a sambo de India. The child of a sambo de India and a sambo de mulata is a Ibero. So there is quite a lot of precision in terms of blood quantum that we already begin to see in the archive, you know, from 1774, so it must have existed before that. And here we have Brian Edwards. You should read that book, it's available online, you can just read it. So similar to Long in terms of the sambo, and then he goes into what a mulatto is, then a quadroon, because in English, of course, this mixed race person called a mulata in Spanish is not, we don't have the same gender demarcation with the or the a. Quadroon is the offspring of a mulatto woman and a white man, and then mesti, musti, right? So there are quite, even though, you know, people don't talk about the incredible amount of blood quantum that there was in English colonialism, they always talk about the Spanish and the Portuguese. There was also a lot in English colonialism as well. Then I've got this one, which you probably can't see that well because it turned out quite small. I couldn't get it any bigger, but it's again the same thing about the color terms. So York Estate in Jamaica in 1820, color terms, sambo, 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 right? And it gives you their occupations on the right and how they were. So it says things like healthy or ill or lame. And you must remember these lists of enslaved people were like just in plantation records. So they'd list the people, then list the animals, then list the equipment. So it was part of the property then of the estate. All right, so we also have sambo in the Cayman Islands in the Caribbean, and I thought that might be interesting for you to see. As late as 1962, we still have the sambo category, you know, being used, and then the parents and the child kind of thing. So sambo was still in local memory in the Cayman Islands up to that point. And this one, which you can't see at all, I know, but I can tell you a bit about it. This is from a kind of an anthropological work that I found in the archives in Kew by, I suppose, I would call him a traveler. I think it's a him. I would call him a traveler rather than, you know, anybody who did this with any sense of precision, right? So anyway, and he presented this to the Royal Anthropological Society, and it was about the groups of people that exist because of mixing in, this is from Lima in Peru, but he did this whole thing of Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is a massive list that he has of the sambo category. And if this person marries this person, then has that child, you know, so again, quite detailed blood quantum rules. Let's see. We know that one, the Negro father and the Indian mother, Sambo, pure Sambo, half Negro, half Indian. Terrible, isn't it? Negro father and mulatto mother, Sambo Negro, Sambo with white, 3/4 Negro, 1/4 white. So you can see they're already counting blood quantum quite considerably by this time, if not before. And this is in Latin America, Lima in Peru. And this person's basic idea was that Zambos, with a Z, were kind of the lowest form of humanity that there were. And you can see how also that was societally maintained by keeping the Sambo category going. It didn't matter how much you mixed. As long as you didn't mix with whiteness, you continued to be kind of this outcast. And I'll just go to 7. So this is an extract from the Edmonton Journal newspaper. You can see the date 1948. And it was an advertisement for Christmas gifts for kids. And it was records, you know, so RCA records. And these albums were unbreakable, apparently. So you could get Little Black Sambo for $3.50, Little Black Sambo and the Jungle Band for $3.50, Little Black Sambo and the Twins for $3.50. So Edmonton Journal, 1948. And certainly in the Edmonton Journal, I found a lot of Sambo things from the 1800s onwards. All right. So let me just say some more. So I'll stop sharing for a minute because I think maybe you might want to see each other, or maybe you might just want to see the blocks. In Lancashire, UK, Sambo's grave is a tourist attraction. It even has its own blue sign. The headstone marks the resting place on unconsecrated ground of an African enslaved boy who died in the 1700s. No one knows exactly where he died, on board ship, in an inn, or why he died. Disease, murder, injury from physical and sexual abuse. No one knows who he was, or where he came from, or even the exact date when he died. No one knows how old he was when he died. No one knows if Sambo was his name. No one knows if his bones are actually there in that field covered by the sea at high tide in Heysham. Sambo is a mystery, but the grave is visited by tourists who follow the sign across the fields, leaving gifts of flowers and messages on stones, speaking of love for long dead Sambo. In Jamaica, Sambo is a young woman in a folk song and a color name for some mixed race people historically, as we saw in the plantation records, listed alongside the animals and other property. In El Archivo de Indias, in Seville in Spain, Sambo is Zambo. And as we saw in Boliar's, the slide on Boliar from Lima, Peru, it's a name to mark race mixing in the former Spanish Caribbean and Latin American colonies between African descendants and indigenous peoples. For example, the Garifuna of St. Vincent, who were deported by the British to clear the land for their settler colony. Sambo is in the National Archives in Kew, UK, and the National Archive, The Hague, in the Netherlands. On display, let me show you this one. I was quite pleased with finding this particular one. Okay, let me go. On display in the National Museum in Sweden, who were very gracious and sent me this picture. And in Australia as a name of subjection of indigenous people, in farm records, in books, and as children's toys for sale in Edmonton, as we saw. Sambo also had a life in animation in the 1930s. and you can watch this online. But Jan also has it lined up in case we've got time for you to watch it a bit, so you can watch it. So 1930s animation, Little Black Sambo. These examples show that sambo is everywhere, but no one knows what it is, even as it appears sticking to many different bodies globally. And I want to show you a postage stamp from Mexico, also in 2005, which caused a bit of a controversy. This is Memin Pinguin, who is a very loved Mexican comic book character. And these comics first came out in 1943. And when there was an uproar about it, many Mexicans said, you know, it was their beloved character. So how dare we intervene? I also wanted to show you something else, which I got from colleagues who found it in a wall of their house in Edmonton, Julie and Danielle. I can't put it all on a slide, so unfortunately you can't really get the image properly, but this was part of it. It was part of a comic strip section in a newspaper that was put into the wall, maybe as insulation, or maybe because somebody just forgot it there and bricked it all up, I don't know. So that's one part of it, which is just, I think, what's this one? Wait. It's not displaying properly. Okay, this is part that I wanted to show you. So this is the Sambo comic strip. And maybe I can show it to you like this. So at the top, it's got this picture of Sambo. And what this one is called is Sambo wants to do a business. So Sambo wants to develop a business. And it's really about the impossibility of Sambo ever having a business at all because of its stupidity, right? So it becomes a scarecrow in a farmer's field because it wanted to be a farmer but couldn't quite do it, and then just quit because, you know, they didn't want to be a scarecrow and get crow's eggs into their hat. So whenever I see this sort of stuff, I'm always a bit bemused. I kind of think, what is funny? Because I can't see what's funny about it, but clearly a lot of people did like those sorts of things because they were very widely circulated in newspapers in North America. That includes Canada. I said North America for a reason. Okay, so here I am. I have these several occurrences of Sambo in my collection of archival material, but what can I make of these emergences of Sambo? So I'll tell you what I thought about to begin with before I go into like analyzing the strands. I think what they all share is that colonial fabulation can become solidified. They can become real. It can become real. And it also shows the continuation of Black subjugation and infrahumanity. For example, think about how this worked in the archive through careful enumeration of racialized difference and blood ancestral lines. That is blood seen as a carrier of the purity of the three roots of the nation in Latin America and the Caribbean, indigenous, African, white European. In the Caribbean and what was once called Nueva España, centered on Mexico City after the fall of the Aztec Empire, and Latin America, the idea of the three roots and blood was certainly very present. Blood can be seen as a carrier of the impurity of race mixing in the categorizations of Sambo in 1800s Peru, as we saw before, or which we see in pictorial form in the 1700s Las Castas paintings in Mexico, for example, showing the mestizaje of white, African, and indigenous people, where indigenous and white mixing eventually produced a vigorous race of white Spanish, but mixing with Africans, or mestiza, but mixing with Africans by indigenous and white people only produced racial degeneration, which had to be carefully enumerated. Producing a vigorous white or mestizo race adapted to its environment was interesting. I said it was interesting because producing this vigorous white race adapted to its environment was also the colonial policy in Australia, for example, where there was breeding out of indigeneity in residential schools, state-sanctioned placements of Indigenous women and girls as domestic workers, opening them up to sexual abuse, transracial marriages, cooptations between working class, poor white men and Indigenous women and girls, and the use of Indigenous women and girls as part of stockmen's pay on farmsteads. With a large array of sambo archival material, my question became, how can I analyze this fabulation? And how can I think through that and theorize from it, especially when sambo is fictive, like all race categories? So that's the next bit I want to go on to now, analyzing the strands. Let me get to the right spot in the slides because I mixed it up a bit. Okay. Analyzing the strands as colonial naming of subjection. So of course, I said before that I did begin by looking through, for the word sambo in things that I was looking at. So I ended up with this fascinating collection of sambo archival material that I amassed through doing a content analysis for sambo or sambo. This wasn't just a mechanical counting, though, of the word sambo. It was looking at what zambo and sambo meant in their colonial context of emergence by doing broad coding, drawing on the data, and also thinking through existing theory on sambo and sambo as a category of racial subjection across white European empires, their settler colonies, and in contemporary coloniality. The next step after that was to analyze this broadly coded data using discourse analysis to move, I suppose, from the micro level of continent analysis to the more macro level of the social. This might seem like a bit of a big leap going from micro to macro, so I think that I need to position myself a bit here as an analyst to say what analytical and theoretical grounding I draw from. So something about me. I always like to talk about myself, as everybody says. It's not true, I really don't. So in terms of analysis then, my approach to analysis starts from when I was doing my PhD. And if you want to read some more about what I developed as what I called an ethno-methodologically inclined discourse analysis, that is EDA, you can read it in chapter 2 of my first book, in the second edition, published in 2017, Black Skin, Black Masks, Hybridity, Dialogism, Performativity, or in the journal FQS as Foucault-Bakhtin Ethnomethodology. I'm getting a bit hoarse. I started my PhD as an ethnomethodologist. So as everyone knows, that means that I did conversation analysis, CA. And after a year of seeing CA as a bit of a dead end in terms of what I wanted to say about the connection between the psyche and the social in Black UK identifications, I moved towards discourse analysis and developed my own approach to both of those, which was EDA, ethno-methodologically inclined discourse analysis. So on to discourse analysis then. I put what to me were things that really helped me in my thinking through discourse analysis. When I was doing my PhD, Ian Parker's work, but subsequently also the work of Erica Berman and Ian Parker as well, have been kind of influential in me thinking about what discourse analysis was. So as you know, there are many different approaches to discourse analysis. Differences between discourse analysts in terms of their philosophical frameworks and different styles of analysis. So for example, critical discourse analysis, a lot of people here at the UFA use critical discourse analysis, drawing from Norman Fairclough. I don't think they draw from Tian van Dyck in the same way. Fairclough focuses on discursive practice, and Van Dyck emphasizes social cognition as the intermediary between text and society. So you really have to find something that appeals to you and then work through that. So Discourse analysis is used across disciplines, drawing on the idea of text, the significance and structuring effects of language, and the use of reflexive and interpretative analytical strategies and practices. But I want to just share with you what Berman and Parker say is common in discourse analysis. And again, it's a bit tiny. I hope you can see it a little bit, but I'm going to go through it anyway. I have time. So firstly, one of the shared understandings, language creates what it describes, and organized into discourses has the power to shape how we experience the world and how we behave. Somebody who used that understanding a lot too, I think, was Stuart Hall when he talked about representation. When we talk or write or draw or animate, etc., we always draw on shared meanings, what conversation analysts would call ethnomethods, so we can understand and communicate. We do this as part of our normal everyday interaction. We draw on ethnomethods. Spoken, written texts, moving or still images produce images of the mind and shared cultural understandings. So this is where I got my idea of the white European settler colonial sambo psyche from. Language produces and constrains meanings, and meanings do not just reside in our heads, but exist within the social, which also dictates how and what we can speak about. So, you know, directly Foucault, right? Well, what this meant for me was that sambo has a discursive life and specific purposes in terms of domination and subjugation. Text as language and images do more than just reflect some reality that it represents, but actively creates it. And meanings are multiple and shifting. So for me, shifting this idea to sambo, sambo can exist in different regions globally and stick to different bodies. So it is a fungible, drawing from Hartman, and transcultural practice category, drawing from Fernando Ortiz. And Hall representation is also important. Our analyses must be done so that they're open to other interpretations and debate. So we need to use as full a text as possible for analyses. And in some of my work on interview data, I also use a conversation analytic way of doing the transcriptions, which is why I call my approach the discourse analysis ethno-methodologically inclined discourse analysis. A world does not exist outside of language. So of course, you know, that's a totally post-structuralist position. We cannot experience reality, behavior, objects, and subjectivity outside language. So reality is socially constructed. So what I draw from that in terms of sambo, European colonialisms created sambo as a social reality during enslavement, colonialism, and their aftermath. Reflexivity makes what you use for analysis of how or what something means and how you do it publicly available for evaluation. So text being analyzed have got to be shown. I also believe in placing myself in the work, not as an invisible view from above. So I also use autoethnography at the start of each chapter of the book. But of course, it's also clear from anything we write, all our analyses, you know, that we have particular ideological, theoretical, and methodological positions. It's not that easy to hide ourselves. Emphasis on contradictions between discourses illustrate their functions within the social context in which they emerge. In terms of sambo again, this is what led me to thinking about the function of sambo as a naming of subjection that was a fungible colonial resource of domination, which could stick to all colonized people's bodies. Discourse analysis looks at structures of oppression in power knowledge terms. And here for me, it's power knowledge on race. Here, because I was decolonizing sambo, I included being in that formulation, power knowledge being, based on Latin American decolonial theory from people like Maldonado Torres, Quijano, Escobar, Mignolo, and Lugones. And I also put affect from my own work because I thought about the need to look at affect in decolonizing racialized meanings, because affect makes us attach or detach, disalienate from racialized meanings of one sort or another. So the analysis that you do, or I did, cannot be merely descriptive. It cannot be a careful elaboration of themes without a connection to power, knowledge, being, affect. It must draw on context in its development and must be theoretically informed work, not just leaving the data on a page and letting it speak. This is the decolonizing part of my discourse analytical work on sambo. So drawing on my own work, again in that second edition book, Black Skins, Black Masks, Hybridity, Dialogism, Performativity, I would say that sambo is a text of social practice because it is a broader dimension of discourse than the various acts accomplished by language users in interpersonal interaction. This accounts for its spread across European empires in various textual forms that I found in the archives. To sum up my approach to discourse analysis, as I say in that book, as she reads text, the discourse analyst focuses on three aspects of language: contradiction, construction, and practice. And I draw this very clearly from Ian Parker's work. She does not seek to uncover an underlying theme that will explain the real meaning of the text. Rather, she seeks contradictions between different significations and the way different pictures of the world are constructed. It is then possible to identify dominant and subjugating meanings and highlight processes of resistance. Discourse analysts do not take meaning for granted, but rather try to look at how meaning has been socially constructed. So in terms of my theoretical foundation, I think it's important to talk about that as well, because it'll give you an idea about like why I did the analysis in the way I did it also, I think. So theoretical then. It has taken me a while to be able to describe my theoretical formation, the foundations of my thinking. And I've just been able to publicly, as in like being in a publication, name this Black decolonial feminism since about 2016, maybe 2017. I draw on a rich tradition of Caribbean decolonial thinking. For example, Fanon, Glisson, the Césaires, Mills, Gordon, the two Amys and Garvey, Rodney, Marston, Winter. I also draw on Caribbean, UK, US Black feminism, Reddock, Mirza, Muhammad, Carby, Lord, Hooks, Hill Collins. All these are just examples. I draw on the Black radical tradition, Angela Davis who that Davis is there, Taylor James Patterson, Afro-pessimism, Mutton, Hartman, Sharp, CRT and racial capitalism, for example, Cedric Robinson, Paul Gilroy, Devon Delgado, Lorna Roberts from the UK, Lorna Roberts, yes. UK Black Cultural Studies, of course, Stuart Hall. Black Writing on Enslavement, Hilary Beckles, Eric Williams, Orlando Patterson. Plantation Economy from Best and Polanyi Levitt, coming out of Trinidad. Fanonian Phenomenology, Affect Theory, like Brennan and Nagai. I see myself as someone who does more Stuart Hall's cultural studies than sociology. So to sum up this part, what the discourse analyses of archival strands enable me to say is that we cannot insist that no one knows what sambo is. And it would be more accurate to say that it always tracks back to sambo, as I've been saying from the beginning, just so you remember, as white European settler colonial naming for Black and people of color degeneracy and subjection. Sambo, unfortunately, also became something that people used to name themselves. For example, as we see in the song, which appears every year in Jamaica's festival, which is like a cultural activity, Jamaica's Big Sambo Gal. Beginning with the Caribbean, if Michael Buckner was here, we could sing this song for you, but I can't see him anywhere. Okay. Beginning with the Caribbean as the primal scene of Spanish invasion, Sambo emerged as a European creation. I think it's really important to focus on that bit. Beginning with the Caribbean as the primal scene of Spanish invasion, Sambo emerged as a European creation. In this context, white side focused on marking racial difference through paying careful attention to ancestry signified by blood quantum. Careful attention was warranted in a colonial context of white men's transracial sex, where only the unmixed white population or the suitably lightened mestizo, mestiza could be white, free, and privileged. Sambo emerged here from what I call the white European settler colonial Sambo psyche, just to remind you again. And drawing from Jamaican US American Black philosopher Charles Mills, it emerges from its epistemologies of ignorance. These epistemologies ensure Black people as humans are erased because of the self-constructions of the white imaginary. These self-constructions keep in place what George Yancey calls whiteliness, that is, a social, psychological, and phenomenological racial reality for white people. And it also keeps in place white supremacy as a structure of racial domination. Whiteliness and white supremacy reproduce societal Samboification as an epistemology of ignorance produced again by that Sambo psyche that I keep talking about, to maintain the status quo of unquestioned white, racial, social, psychological, cultural, and political dominance. So just imagine that dominance produced through a thing which does not exist, or exists only as a racist construction in the white archive, popular culture, mind. Sambo is still present in kids' books, in sweets. If you ever go to Spain and you're in a supermarket queue, just look at the sweets that are there at the checkout counter, and you'll see sweets called conguitos. Conguitos is, it really means little congons. And, you can have milk conguitos. So the picture you see is of a Sambo character that's a bit lighter skinned, or you can have dark chocolate conguitos, so a bit darker skinned again. Toys, films. If anyone watched Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle in 2017 and couldn't laugh at the jokes because of the Kevin Hart character, I'm with you on that one. I was the same. I couldn't laugh either. If you don't believe me, just watch it. Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, all the way in 2017, Kevin Hart's character. Or if you want more entertainment or more, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened, you can also watch Tropic Thunder from 2008 with Robert Downey Jr. We've also seen Sambo in clothing. Remember that Gucci sweater with the red lips in 2019, which was taken off the market because of criticism that this was maintaining the Sambo character, or the Gollywog character it was criticized as being in the UK. We also had Katy Perry's Rue and Aura shoes. They were also taken off the market because of blackface criticism, but you can still buy Aura flats on Amazon. I checked it just before I came on. You can still buy them there. And so you can check it if you like, Aura flats, Amazon, and you'll see what I mean there. There's also Blackamoor jewelry, which is still beloved by European royalty and Elton John. There are images and tourist sites, for example. So Sambo continues to live on. Now I'm going to ask how much time I really have left. Oh, look at that, Sadvi. I think I'll have to wind up. I can't really do the humor part because I think I should leave people time to ask me questions if they want to ask me something. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. If you want to give a sort of maybe a summary or some thoughts for us to
of the humor, or just of the humor. Okay, all right, thank you. I'll do that. I'll share my screen again so you can see some of what I mean, because I think it's important to do that. Right, so share. All right, let me find an earlier one. Actually, we could even watch the movie. Not the movie, the animation. I'll show you some Sambo speech, which was supposedly funny. Hope I can find it now. Sambo speech. Okay, so this sambo speech was there in the Edmonton Journal, as I said, from the 1800s. And I think maybe up to the 1940s, it was still there. Not the 50s so much, but definitely up until the 40s. And it was a similar kind of thing. It was, you know, there were the newspaper pages, and they'd have things like events that were happening in Edmonton, you know, like shows or something like that. And then you'd have just this insertion, small or big, an insertion with this sambo speech in it, which was supposed to be funny. So this one was from 1929, and it's this thing called the Fun Shop. So one was called Revolting, and the other one was what the Fun Shop contributors did to that revolting. And they say this is how they got it. I don't know how it reached the Fun Shop joke factory, but Dr. Smythe, sambo, I can't think of but one thing that will cure you, and that is an electric bath. And then we have the sambo speech. Now, remember that it's not a Black person who wrote this. White people were writing this, right? So there is kind of this, I began to think of it as like a standard orthography for sambo speech that kept emerging in the Edmonton Journal. And it even emerged, for example, in a newspaper article about an interaction between two members of parliament, right? It's in the book, you can read it, where one of them actually spoke in this way. And it was seen as very funny. Yeah, so anyway. So in this then, basically, you know, there's this, I can't even read it. It's like, you know, it's just horrific, but you can read it yourself and see what I mean. And this is supposed to be funny, you know, in the funny section. What's the other one? Is there another? And then in 1919, again, from the Edmonton Journal, this is a sambo speech, but it's about a play. So it's a report about a play that was here in Edmonton. And, you know, the performer was Baby Marie Osborne, and the place that it occurred was the Imperial. So maybe there was an Imperial theater here, or maybe the Imperial Theater was somewhere else. Maybe I'm misreading it. So that's the story. Baby Marie Osborne, a French orphan adopted by a wealthy American family, had never seen a member of the colored race until her arrival at the Bradley West home. Now, if she's French, how has she never seen a member, as they say, of the colored race? France had incredible colonialism and enslavement beginning in the Caribbean. So I'm trying to admit someone. Can you admit that person, Jan, please? But they claim she'd never seen anyone Black before. Her governess told Marie not to play with little Sambo because he was a colored child. And Marie, sweet, unknowing little girl that she was, said, "Excuse me, mademoiselle, but Sambo hasn't been colored at all. He was born that way. He told me so." That's supposed to be a punchline, but I didn't find it funny either, right? So continuing, she still wanted to play with Sambo. So what she decided to do was to make him white. He was colored, she couldn't play with him, so she made him white. So she put a pail of whitewash on him. Again, there's supposed to be a joke about Sambo and whitewashing, anyway, because that appears also in comic strips. So just painting this whitewash on, Marie made Sambo into a white child, with results which were laughable. I suppose that's the punchline as well, and highly disconcerting to the master of the household, where now white Sambo rolls over that august gentleman, leaving his imprint behind him. Again, I struggle to see the joke, but I suppose people reading it might have found it quite funny because of the whitewash, the rolling over, the master of the house, the colored kids, you know, I don't know. Jan, would you like to play the animation? I'll come out of this because you'll have to share your screen. I don't know if it'll work on this. So this is that animation, you know, the Comicolor one from the 1930s of Little Black Sambo that Jan will play you now if it works. And you'll see some of the continuing themes like the caricature image, the laughs, the closeness of Sambo to animals, the mammy character, the dirty bathwater that was the same color as Sambo when she took him out of it. Anyway, watch it and you can say what you think. Can't hear the sound, Jan.
Now run along and play, honey child. But watch out for that bad old tiger. That old tiger sure do like dark meat.
You can stop it now, Ian. Thank you. Right, I just want to just finish it off now by talking about then the humor part and why it wasn't particularly funny to me, but maybe to others it might be. Okay, so you know, that 1930s animation is a remake in a way for the American context of the 1800s book, Little Black Sambo. The tiger is still in it. As far as I know, there are no tigers in the United States, but there could be in a zoo. It escaped, okay? But the Sambo character remains very similar. If you read the Little Black Sambo book, published in the 1800s, there is still like what you could call the mummy character in there, the mum. I think it's Mumbo she's called or something like that, or it's called Mumbo. And Sambo looks like that kind of stereotype of the African child, even though the context is India, because that book was written by a British colonial woman trying to entertain her kids as they were traveling on the trains in India, apparently, right? Anyway. So when I first began to think about Sambo humor in the first edition, I really wondered why I couldn't laugh, why I was instead offended, and what it could really be about. So I went to Shanna Guy's work. I hope that's how she pronounces her name. And that book is called Ugly Feelings. And in that book, she talks about sublimity. And I really recognized all of the kind of gamut of feelings, emotions that I was going through when I was looking through this humor that I never found funny. And what she says is that we should think about like sublimity. So white supremacist Sambo humor is operationalized through what Shanna Guy calls sublimity. And she says this is what it is. It's a concatenation of boredom and astonishment, a bringing together of what dulls and what irritates or agitates, of sharp, sudden excitation and prolonged desensitization, exhaustion or fatigue. Sublimity is a tension that holds opposing affects together. Sublimity could be said to belong more properly to the dirtier environs of bottom humor. Sublimity reveals the limits of our ability to comprehend a vastly extended form as a totality, not through an encounter with the infinite, but with finite bits and scraps of material in repetition. And that's what you see in Sambo humor across the archive as you collect it, finite scraps and bits of material in repetition. There's often a comical and even farcical element to sublimity. So it's farcical in my point of view is not comical because I didn't find it funny. Sublimity paradoxically forces the reader to go on in spite of its equal enticement to readers to give up. It's interesting the kind of tensions that are there as we look at Sambo humor. So let me just conclude briefly then. The examples, I think is brief, is it? Yeah, it has to be. The examples illustrate that Sambo served, let me stop sharing, sorry. Yes, the examples illustrate that Sambo served to reassure people racialized as white that biology was a rigid enforcer of racial inferiority. For example, Sambo was an illustration of humor as a device of oppression and one of the most potent in North American popular culture. The ultimate objective for whites was to effect mastery, as Boskin says in his 1986 book. Post-enslavement, Sambo remained white property, as Cheryl Harris would say. Sambo was always called into service by white supremacy through Sambo humor, infantilization, and Sambo ideas which spread around the world. For Sambo's longevity, the racist phenomenology and visibility regimes of enslavement and white European settler colonialism reproduced a sublimity and disattendability that was necessary for the racial contract that underlay racial capitalism during empire and beyond. Continuing samboification means that whiteness occupies being, annihilating Black and people of color intersectional subjecthood through social death. Annihilation occurs from denial of any possibility of becoming human by keeping the white constructed system of race alive through the racial contracts epistemologies of ignorance. This is an inverted epistemology, as Charles Mills would say, a particular pattern of localized and global cognitive dysfunctions, which are psychologically and socially functional, producing the ironic outcome that whites will in general be unable to understand the world they themselves have created. That's it, sadly, I think. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. And I really want to thank the 323 people that registered for today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you.